Welcome everyone to week 3 of the Solidarity semester, hosted by Solidarity Is and the Building Movement Project. If you were here last week, welcome back. If you're new, we're so glad that you're joining us. My name is Catherine Foley, and I'm the Communications and Operations Associate at Building Movement Project, and I'm also a part of the Solidarity semester team. This week, we'll be focusing on solidarity in practice and expanding on some of the principles that we learned last week. Before we get into that, I just want to share some of the tech logistics for today. As you probably know, this is a Zoom webinar, so participants are not visible, but you can use the Q&A box to send questions and tech issues. We've also enabled the chat, so please feel free to respectfully share your thoughts and ideas. Let us know your names, your pronouns, where you're joining us from, and why you're here today. Finally, this session is being recorded, and we'll share the recording along with the transcript and all of the other resources via email every Monday. If you haven't been receiving these emails, please let us know and we'll fix it. All of the materials are also uploaded to the Solidarity Is website, so you can access them there. Moving into the calendar for the rest of the semester. So over the past 2 weeks, we've learned about our social change roles, and we've learned about what solidarity looks like in action. Now, in our 3rd week, we're going to dive into and expand upon the 6 principles of transformative solidarity practice. As usual, we have the session tonight, and we also have the session on Thursday on BMP's Instagram. This week, we'll be speaking with Judith Dianis of the Advancement Project's National Office. She'll be in conversation with Deepa Iyer, BMP's Director of Movement Building, and they'll be talking about racial justice movements and the urgent need to combat and end anti-Black racism. This conversation will take place on BMP's Instagram. If you're not following it, you can follow it at Building Movement Project, and it'll take place at 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We still have 2 more weeks in the semester, and that means we still have 2 more speakers to hear from, so please remember to tune in on Thursdays. Cool. So moving on, we're going to take a quick look back. In week 2, we introduced the 6 C's of solidarity practice. We talked about why solidarity is important and also how it happens both on a personal level and as part of campaigns and movements. We focused on one principle called centering, and we discussed why it's important to center and uplift communities who are directly affected by inequality and injustice, and to amplify their solutions and needs. The other 5 C's of transformative solidarity practice are commonalities, capacity, co-conspirators, connections, and co-liberation. We'll talk more about these today. Moving on to the next slide, you can see the notes taken from our Instagram Live with Janine Comanote of the National Urban Indian Family Coalition. Deepa was speaking with Janine about the top issues facing Native communities, both prior to and as a result of COVID-19. They also talked about the importance of the Native vote, and most importantly, Janine reminded us that we're all in relationship with one another and we're all interconnected. These graphic notes were created by our designer, Jada, and you can find them on the BMP Instagram, you can find them on our resources page, and you can also follow Jada at Vibrant Visuals to see more of her work. And then finally, as a reminder, everything from these sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays is also available on the Solidarity Is website. You can go to the Solidarity semester page and click on the drop down, and you can see the resources which are listed in this Padlet. You can also go directly to it at bit.ly/solidarityispadlet. You can find the syllabi, the recordings, transcripts, literally everything. And we also include some of the materials that we mention each week, like the 6 C's of transformative solidarity and the social change ecosystem map. If you have any difficulty accessing these, just let us know and we'll figure something out. Finally, I will hand things over to Deborah.
Hi, everyone. We wanted to remind you all about our Power Up Internship opportunity, which is designed to connect youth leaders like you to US-based social justice organizations. We have some criteria on this slide here. We encourage those of you who are between 18 and 25 years old to apply, and that you be able to commit to this general timeline of 5 to 8 hours per week from roughly October 15th to December 15th. And we also urge you to continue engaging in our weekly sessions so that you can take these tools and move them forward into that experience. This deadline is coming up fast. It is this Sunday, October 4th. So be sure to submit your application and resume as soon as you can. and we will send the FAQ link in the chat. And now we'll kind of shift into a Q&A where you guys can drop your questions about the opportunity in the chat, and we will make sure to answer those. And to start, we can kind of share some of the questions we've already received. Many of you have asked if you are allowed to apply if you are not currently pursuing a degree. Yes, feel free to apply even if you aren't a student, though we are prioritizing folks who are between the ages of 18 and 25, as I said. Let's see, I know we've got some questions starting to come in. At this point, so we have, is the Power Up Internship Program offered every year? So this is a unique opportunity at this point, so be sure to take advantage of it while it is available this year. And is the internship virtual? We've gotten that question quite often. Yes, so you will be working with the organization remotely. So you'll be using tools as you've been using like Zoom and email to communicate with that organization. Let's see, so if you missed a session, will you still be eligible for the opportunity? Yes, you are. We do encourage you to view the recording that we have on the Padlet that Catherine mentioned, but we understand that you aren't able to tune in live every time, so that's not a problem. Let's see. So is the internship going to have a fixed weekly schedule? That's a good question. So we have a general timeline of the 5 to 8 hour commitment, roughly for those 2 months, though the exact time frame will be dependent on the organization that you are connected with. So that's something that you and your intern supervisor will be able to work out once you are matched. Will the internship be paid or provide stipends? Yes, we will be providing a stipend for this opportunity. Okay, so we're getting some questions about the type of organizations that you'll be working with. So we have a broad range of nonprofits working on issues around supporting marginalized communities, immigrant rights, combating anti-Blackness, promoting equity and civil rights. So we have a pretty broad range of issue areas that organizations are focusing on. We have civic engagement as well. So, and we do have an opportunity in the application form for you to include what your interest areas are so that we can be cognizant of that and work to try to connect you with an organization that is focused on those particular issue areas. Let's see. All right, and then some other questions that we have received too are, what types of work will you be asked to do? So it can be anything from research, writing and communications, potentially some social media engagement, voter engagement efforts, as these next 2 months are especially critical for that. Supporting like virtual events that the organization is putting on, writing projects, data collection. So it's a pretty broad range of opportunities that you will have to increase those skill areas. Let's see. We do have a limited number of internship openings available, so we do encourage you to get your applications in so we can begin that vetting process. And in terms of how you are matched with a nonprofit, so as I mentioned before, yeah, you indicate your interest area and kind of what experiences you have. And so we will do our best to cater to those interest areas, those skill areas, and make that connection. In terms of the range of options of interest areas, we provide a few examples on the application form, but you can feel free to add in kind of any area that you are passionate about and that you might have experience in, and we can make note of that. Let's see what other types of questions are coming in. So yes, going back to the age range, feel free to apply if you fall slightly outside of this age range, though know that we are prioritizing 18 to 25-year-olds. So we got a question around if there are any majors or area of study that we're looking for in particular. Not really. I mean, whatever major you have, we will make note of, and each major brings in their own skills and value add to the organization that they'll be working with. So we don't have set parameters around that. Let's see what else we have here. Something to consider in terms of what you can do let's see, what we look for most in an applicant. I think one thing I just suggest is engaging with the Solidarity semester as much as you can. There will be a question on the application form where you can share what your main takeaways are from the Solidarity semester. So make sure to draw on this experience. I think that's something that we are looking for in particular. So if you do have more questions, I know we're looking to switch into the next phase of the session, but feel free to email them to the Solidarity is Campaign Gmail account, and we will drop that in the chat. But yeah, I think we can move forward to the next section.
Thank you, Deborah, for answering all of those questions. And like we said, we want to engage with you throughout this process, so feel free to send us an email. And, in terms of ways to engage with us and ways to, for us to get to know you outside of these sessions, one way is right now, we'd love for you to introduce yourself via Instagram. So, we have the Instagram lives through the Building Movement Project Instagram, and not now, or maybe now, if you're looking for something to do with your phone, you can just introduce yourself and let us know why you're excited about the Solidarity semester. We've talked, about a lot of different concepts and their applications, like what it looks like to engage in activism these days through a solidarity lens. Let us know how you have taken on the information that we've given you and used it. And with that, I believe we have a poll to just kind of, get a sense of what you have been drawn most to in these sessions. So Catherine, whenever you can, drop it in the poll. I feel like I should have music while this is happening, some sort of background elevator music. Instead, it's just me bobbing my head. So, okay, this is awesome. So, just looking at your results as you weigh in, a lot of folks are this is an opportunity to reflect on your role in your social change ecosystem, which is awesome. A lot of what we're talking about, today and in every session is really that in order to do this work, you have to know yourself, and you have to know both your, what, insights your experiences lend to the work, along with what your, privileges might also obscure from how you enter into this space. So this is really great. And also sharing this knowledge with others. Like we said, all of these materials are online, recorded on the Padlet. We're sharing, different tools. This is definitely something that when you're looking to kick off any student organizing campaigns or any community organizing campaigns, is a really great way of just getting to know how everyone around you that is engaging in some sort of social change action is viewing what they can bring to the table. So thank you so much for, sharing with us, what you're taking away from this. And I will move on to just start to talk a bit about, what we discussed last week. Catherine gave us a really great overview of the principles for transformative solidarity practice. And one of the things that I just want to emphasize again with these principles is that one, you all have likely engaged in these actions in the work that you're doing. This is giving you a definition, a tool through which to discuss it with other people. We talked a lot about centering last week, so I will not go in as much about it, but this is, and also last time, a lot of you asked for a tool that would give you the definitions to each of these. Look on the Padlet, it is there. And just again to touch on the things that we have already focused on, it was centering. And one of the key takeaways to just emphasize when it comes to centering is, and going back to some of the questions y'all asked last time, centering does not mean that the work of dismantling systems of oppression falls on those most impacted by them. It means that we engage in a co-liberation strategy, which we'll talk about today, to actually lend all our labor, lend our support towards a vision that actually centers the solutions that those most impacted have. And then we're also going to have a really awesome conversation or awesome dialogue with Deepa about what co-conspiratorship is and how we can engage in it. And so I'm just going to start with kicking us off on talking about co-liberation. And actually, before I do that, just to make sure I'm not missing on anything that y'all are dropping in the chat, I'm going to take a look, see what y'all are saying. And it looks like, a lot of these are cool. It looks like a lot of these questions are about the solidarity semester. So great, that definitely, thanks to the team for dropping in the answers to that. So we're going to talk about co-liberation, and we're going to go through things kind of quickly. So make sure to drop in your questions, because when I'm done presenting, I can go jump in there and answer them. So co-liberation, that's believing in the collective us. And one of the things that I found myself repeating more and more often in social change spaces has been a quote by Mariame Kaba that says, "Hope is a discipline." So hope is a discipline. What it has meant to me most in these last few days is trusting that collectively we have the power to change the conditions around us, and trusting those people around me that we're actually engaging both in community care and trusting that we have a vision that actually leads towards, a liberated space for us all. We're working towards mutual freedom, power, agency, and access to rights. And this means working at many different levels. But central to that is understanding, and particularly for, like we said a lot, we know that there are a lot of international students or international folks joining us. But this part of it, there are some very global applications to understanding that anti-Black racism, white supremacy, and Indigenous invisibility are global problems. What do they look like in your particular country? That is something that we're not going to get into, but we are going to talk about it in the sense of what is happening here in the US, and how anti-Black racism and white supremacy is particularly, hand in hand with the invisibilization of Indigenous people, how that is something that we actually can counter by centering Black folks, Indigenous folks in our work. Janine gave us a really great example of that by just saying all of us sitting everywhere, somewhere, we are on someone else's land. So this is co-liberation, is that remembrance of a history that most countries share. And so I'm actually in there, am I passing this on to you, Deepa, at this point? Wonderful. And so I'll hand it off to you to talk about co-conspiratorship.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anna. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be back and to see you all. Really appreciate so many of the questions in the chat. As Anna said, we want to really encourage you to continue to drop questions in there, whether it's about Power Up or a Solidarity semester, or obviously the content that Anna and I are sharing. Feel free. We're going to have time for Q&A. We built in a little bit more time today because there were so many great questions that you all were asking last time. Before we get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about taking the thread that Anna started about co-liberation and continuing it with the other C, the next C that we want to talk about today, which is co-conspirators. And this is a definition of co-conspirators, but we're going to get into it a little bit more. But co-conspirators are folks who have a stake in the demands made by affected communities. So again, centering affected communities, listening to their demands, but also having a stake in mutual liberation. And a lot of times, I know as the next slide shows, we are used to talking about solidarity through the lens of an ally, right? And I would love it in the chat if you all could say a little bit and share a little bit about when you think of being an ally, what are some questions that come up for you? What are some ideas that come up for you in terms of being an ally? Because that's really how most of us have thought about what solidarity practice is, that we want to be an ally to those who are directly affected, that we want to be an ally to people and movements for change, and we want to show up with support and solidarity, right? And so I'd love to know in the chat if you want to share a little bit about what it means to be an ally. When you think of that term, what does it mean for you? And at the same time, we want to actually invite and challenge all of us to move from being an ally to being a co-conspirator. And this is not a move that is so simple as to use a different term or terminology or definition. This is an actual process, right? It actually means that we are making some significant changes in our mindsets and in our actions. So on this slide, we talk a little bit about what the differences are between allies and co-conspirators and how we move from being an ally to a co-conspirator. And I want to point out first and foremost that this is not new material. We are drawing upon decades and generations of thought leadership, practice, and communication from others. So just want to drop some of those names because I think it's really important. Tawana Petty is one person that you might want to look up and read about. Bettina Love is another. IndigenousAction.org is another. The Black Liberation Movement of the 60s is another source. So there are many folks who have been talking about how do we become co-conspirators and why is that so important? And I see here in the chat that a couple of folks are responding to this question about what do you think of when you think of the word allyship or ally? So Sage says traditional allyship is fairly passive. Yeah, and Sage, if we were in a real workshop, I would say more because I'd love to know what you mean by that. But that is something that we're going to get into in a second. Sherry says, an ally is a verb, not a noun. It's a constant process to work towards liberation. Absolutely. Laura, to be an ally is to listen to those who are being oppressed and ask how I could help and actually try to make that change happen. Yeah. I think both Laura, Sherry, and Sage all kind of have this sense of being an ally is sometimes passive, but what it requires is some movement and action and change. And so being a co-conspirator is what we want to invite you to think about. So what does that mean? So allies oftentimes are driven or motivated by this sense of, okay, I have to do this because it's the right thing to do. I want to show up. And sometimes it's often driven by a vague sense of shame or guilt, right? I have a lot of privilege. I want to show up and I want to do something about it. So I'll just do X, Y, Z. Co-conspirators, on the other hand, are driven by co-liberation. And what that means, as Anna said, is that if you have a stake in co-liberation, you have a personal stake in what is going on. Right? You're not just doing this because you care about another group's stance or campaign or cause. You're doing it because you also have something that you believe is important for your entire community. Another way that allies act are oftentimes, allies have a lot of privilege and positionality at times. Not always, but at times they may have it. But they're oftentimes unwilling to utilize it for the sake of the broader campaign or cause, whereas a co-conspirator is ready to take risks. So let me give you a quick example. If, for example, you are somebody who has a position in student government on your college campus, and you have an open door with the administration at your school, and you notice that a group of undocumented students are organizing on campus, and what they're demanding is an increase in services, from mental health to financial support to classes about immigration from the faculty and the administration. Now, if you are an ally, you might say, I believe in that. As a student government elected official, I believe in that on campus. I think that's really important. I'm going to show up at different events. But if you're a co-conspirator, what you would do is actually say, I'm going to open the doors I have for this organization and this group of people to actually be able to directly communicate with administration leadership. I'm going to give up my spot. I'm going to open the door. I'm going to talk about why it is important for them, and then I'm going to let them lead the way. So that's an example of utilizing one's own privilege and positionality, taking a risk, giving up privilege sometimes, sacrificing, but opening the door for others who are more directly affected. And in doing so, if you are a co-conspirator, you're also somebody who is driven by co-liberation. You're not doing this just because you think undocumented immigrants should have rights. That's definitely one. But you're also doing it because you know that your campus community will be strengthened and enriched if there are undocumented immigrants on campus as well. So that's how we think about co-liberation as a stake in it, that we have a stake in it too, and that we're ready to utilize our privilege and positionality for risks. Two other characteristics of co-conspirators. Co-conspirators are always going to seek the input and guidance and the consent of people who are directly affected. So co-conspirators aren't going to go off and do whatever they think is right. They're going to check in, right? And that's really what accountability is too. They're going to check in and say, is it all right if I do this? I have an idea. Or what do you want me to do? How do you want me to show up? So that means that co-conspirators have meaningful relationships with people directly affected. They're not parachuting in. They're not floating in to a campaign or a cause. They're actually building. And as we have said from the start, solidarity is all about trust and relationship building, right? And it takes a long process. And then finally, co-conspirators reflect. And you all said, I think part of what you said in the poll is that this content is leading you to reflect, right? And that is what co-conspirators do time and again. They reflect, they course correct, and what that means is that they make mistakes. We all make mistakes. They reflect, they course correct based on what is needed from them by those who are affected. So those are just some characteristics and some reasons and an example of how to move from being an ally to a co-conspirator. And we can move to the next slide to talk about some more of those examples as well. And then I see some questions in the chat, and Anna and I will take those in just a little bit as we get to the Q&A portion. But I wanted to give you a couple of more examples of co-conspirators in our midst, and along with the one I gave on in terms of a campus experience. And as I give you these, I would love to know if you have been a co-conspirator at times, right? Have you actually acted in that way? What would it take for you to act in that way as well? So allies oftentimes want to be supportive, but co-conspirators are actually thinking about what's in this for me and how can I actually play a role that utilizes my power and privilege. It is not wrong to be an ally. It is not something that one wants to poo-poo and say, no, it's not enough. But as we think about transformative solidarity practice, we want to ask ourselves, how do we deepen it, right? How do we get more effective at it? And that's why we're inviting you to think about how you can turn your allyship into being a co-conspirator. So one example I wanted to pull up, and this is an example that always inspires me all the time, actually, and I have been returning to this example quite a bit, the Freedom Riders. And Freedom Riders, you might remember and know this, right? John Lewis, for example, was a Freedom Rider. In 1960, the Supreme Court of the US had already held that in public buses, you could not segregate people by race, right? So that means the public buses were intended to be integrated. Anyone could go on them, anyone could sit wherever they wanted. However, in the South, in many Southern states, segregation continued to occur, and those Supreme Court decisions were not really being enforced or implemented. So that's why in 1961, two organizations, SNCC, as well as the Congress on Racial Equality, or CORE, decided to test what was going on in the South. So what they did was they intensely trained white folks and Black folks, males and females, to actually go down to the South to ride these public buses and to integrate them. So a Black person and a white person would go on together and they would sit next to each other, as you can see in one of these pictures. Now, as you can imagine, freedom riders were not met with, welcome and kumbaya. They were met with violence. They were met with Klan violence by the KKK. They were met with bomb threats. They lost, many of them were in a situation where their lives could have been lost. And they were, as you see, they lost their liberty at times. They were arrested, as you can see from these mugshots. But they persisted. And when a Freedom Rider bus had to be stopped, another one would start up in another part of the country. You can tell I get excited about this because I feel that it is one of the most inspiring, I get goosebumps actually talking about it. I think it's one of the most inspiring experiences and representations of solidarity, of transformative solidarity. And so some of the lessons here, right, are centering. Again, right, these folks followed the lead of groups like CORE and SNCC. Co-liberation is here. This is about all of us, how we want our country to be. And it's about being a co-conspirator because folks took risks, right? White folks here decided to utilize their power and privilege and positionality as white folks to take a risk by integrating these buses. Black folks also took risks as well, right? Women took risks. And at the end of the day, they actually built long-term relationships with each other too. So this is an example of how the idea of co-liberation and mutual liberation that Anna talked about in the beginning is actually being reflected in practice by people who are co-conspirators for the fight for justice. If you're interested in learning more about freedom riders, there is a documentary, there are books. I invite you to read more and learn more about these freedom riders and how they are part and parcel of the civil rights movement in the 60s as well. One more example, and then I think we're gonna take your questions. So this example is more recent, and it's an example that comes from Louisville, which actually happens to be my hometown. And this is a picture that is related to the Brianna Taylor uprising, right? The uprising in Louisville that started and went on for months, every single night after Brianna Taylor was murdered. And this particular picture we wanted to show because it's also an example of how allies can be co-conspirators. So you might know that a lot of white folks also participated in the uprising in Louisville, especially in the beginning of these uprisings. And what happened one night is that as white folks were there in a part of the downtown, Helm, who is an activist with Black Lives Matter and just a real force actually in Louisville, told this group of white folks, if you're gonna be here, you should defend the space, right? If you're going to be here, if you're gonna show up here, then you should defend this space. And in a way, what Helm is doing there is asking folks to respond with, what's your stake, right? Chanel is asking, what is your stake here? Why are you here? What's your stake in co-liberation? What are you gonna do? And so these folks then formed a wall and protected Black activists who were behind them and protected them from law enforcement. It is what Helm and others asked for, right? Centering, listening, being in relationship with folks who are affected. And it is a way to say, we're not just here to show up as allies, we're actually going to take another step. We're going to utilize our white privilege to do X, Y, Z, in this case, to respond to what a Black activist was asking them to do. So this is another example of how folks can think about mutual liberation, right? We want to end anti-Black racism. We want justice. We want liberation for everyone. Because if Some folks don't have it, nobody has it. That's what co-liberation is. And then how do we then respond to that? Not passively, but actually, again, with a real energy, momentum, motivation, courage, risk-taking, listening, and centering. So on the next slide, we have a couple of questions that you might want to think about as you consider your own allyship and solidarity, right? So some of these questions, and there are others, but these are a few that we'd like to invite you to think about. What is at stake for me, right? And how is that connected to the larger cause? So if I believe that undocumented immigrants have rights in this country, what's that mean for me? That's the question. How is it connected? How is that connected to the larger cause of justice, right? So asking that question is important, because when we show up as co-conspirators, we're not just showing up for others, we're showing up for all of us, the collective we. A second question you might want to consider is, what are your privileges and positions, and how will you utilize them? This can be a very personal question. I think that for each of us, as we've talked about before, we hold different privileges. People of color hold privileges too, right? And the question is, how can we utilize those privileges? How can we utilize our positions to open doors? Not every act of co-conspiratorship has to be as a disruptor, right? When you think of the ecosystem map, not all of us can be frontline responders and disruptors. But we can do other things. Like in my example of the student government, I talked about opening the door, right? And using your position to allow others to take a seat at the table. Sometimes it's giving up your seat at the table. The third question is, how are you building long-term relationships with organizations and communities directly affected? And this is important because this is what enables us to center, right? And to learn and to practice, of course, accountability. And it's something that takes a while to build deep and meaningful relationships with folks. But I would say that over the course of your life, you will build long-term relationships with communities who are affected. Perhaps not the same people, right? But you will build them if this is important to you in your life. And then finally, how do I practice self-accountability? What are the ways in which I'm holding myself to account? Who are the people that could hold me to account, right? How am I responding when I get feedback? How am I responding when I get criticism? That isn't always nice feedback. What do I do with that? So thinking about that as well, self-awareness and self-accountability can be really helpful too. So these are just 4 questions for folks to think about as you think about making that shift from being an ally to a co-conspirator. I want to bring Anna into the conversation here too. And we're gonna, I think, try to take a couple of questions. But before we do that, I'd love to ask you, Anna, if you can share a little bit, because I know you're also thinking about all of these questions. You're thinking about this in the work that you do and have been doing. If you can share a little bit about what does it mean to kind of make that shift and go through that process of from allyship to being a co-conspirator?
Yeah, definitely. And I've also just been scrolling through the chat, so I'm just gonna address some of those things that people have said. And, one of the first questions we got really centered around this idea of we have been told there's a best practice of, we are not going to ask people that are directly impacted what they need. It is not their responsibility to educate us. And that is fact. And I think what that then needs for us is basically everything you've gone back to, Deepa, that is about, we research, so we read, and we invest locally. So for example, a lot of what has been happening in this past year may not have happened in your own backyard. When it comes to the activism around Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, all of these different instances of state violence, it may not have been happening in your backyard, but you see and recognize that this is a national problem. So then what steps do you take? For me, that might look like, I'm going to look at how the local budget in my city is allocated. I may look at, what organizations are particularly calling for, anything that falls under the category of divestment from police. I may look at, folks that are using the defund the police banner in my area, in my, neighborhood. All of these folks are offering online meetings. They're offering resources to read up on locally what's going on in your area. So there are so many ways that we can be informed and seek out information that don't have to do with asking a directly impacted person, what do you need? But I am also someone that believes in building meaningful, transformative relationships. And for me, those are really friendships. I am someone that is like very conscious of the fact, I'm like, the way that I grew up, I may have been surrounded by one particular community. And I may like have no real meaningful connections with someone else in another community. And so I'm like, it's not going to be about building relationships because you're looking for some sort of diversity in your own friendship. It's just the recognition that maybe I'm only surrounded by people that are only talking about certain issues. And maybe I need to find media, maybe I need to find the news, maybe I need to find a way to actually get different perspectives into what I'm talking about every single day. Basically recognizing, like, in the environment that I'm in, am I actually getting all the information that I need to make an informed decision about what to do? And I also was thinking, for me, Deepa, like you talked about moving from ally to co-conspirator, I saw a lot of people drop in really awesome definitions of allyship into the chat. And me, I'm not so dogmatic on definitions. What I am is really big on feeling. I know what it feels like when someone engages me in a genuine way as a person. And I also know what it feels like when someone engages with me to get something from me. And so these are things that are really kind of at the core of like allyship versus co-conspiratorship. Am I doing this to get a gold star? Am I doing this to get a like on Instagram? Am I doing this because I want people to know I'm engaging in it? That's good. That's a start. But then am I then putting out information that is actually leading people to take action? Basically, am I just signifying that I'm into the right things, or am I actually investing deeply in those things? And I think that goes to like this idea of, combating white supremacy and fighting anti-Black racism and centering indigeneity really goes to the core of another thing: fighting extractive capitalism. And fighting this idea of branding, because someone else brought up in the comments, like this idea of allyship being something that they particularly see as like a brand puts up a statement that says, I support Black lives. But then what action are they actually putting to meaningfully support Black lives? So that, I think, is also a good way of signifying. It's like, it doesn't feel transformative. It actually just feels very performative. And the last thing I will say, like, even in that example of the Louisville moms, I think that's good. But then it brings up this other example of the wall of moms in Portland. And how that became a really big conversation point, a really big boiling point in Portland, because you had folks that were engaging in an action in which there wasn't consent. And then that action, the media follows what white folks do and not what the Black organizers are actually calling for. So that's like another aspect of, like, I think engaging in allyship and co-conspiratorship. It's that it's about the process. It's not about the process may be very like behind the scenes. Solidarity is not like some, at times not some Hollywood glamorized thing that is going to be on a movie and a big screen. Sometimes it's literally going to be the messy conversations you have as you actually engage in building meaningful relationships in which you're actually able to get critiqued and want to continue doing the work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hannah. And thanks for, I love what you said when you said it's really not about the definitions, right? It's really about the signifiers. It's about the feeling. It's about how you make others feel also, which is so important. And I feel like one of the questions that came up that I want to see if I can quickly get to is this question from Tanya. How do you push your locally elected officials to transform from being an ally to a co-conspirator? How do you inspire others to fight for that push as well? That's a really good question. And I think that, it's important to know that a lot of times it is tough to push local elected officials to take on some of these stances that we want, because a lot of times they have self-interests, right, that are guiding them. But you can again ask elected officials for sort of the same kinds of responses, or ask them the same questions that we're asking here, right? Ask them to define what is at stake for them in a particular issue, right? If they say that they believe in immigrant justice, ask them what that means, why it's important to them. Ask them to utilize their privilege. A lot of elected officials have they have access, right? Depending on where they sit, whether it's very local or obviously at the federal level, they have access. They have access to funding. They have access to other decision makers and policy makers. They have access to information at the government level that many people don't have. And so it's really important to ask them to utilize their positions. I have seen, for example, at the federal level and at the local level, how legislators will utilize their time on the floor when they get to go to the floor to make a speech, and they'll actually talk about an issue. It might not be up for legislation. They will spend the time talking and raising awareness, right? Others will open up the budget process, make it a participatory budgeting process so that the community can actually weigh in terms of where the money is going. So there are different ways in which you could ask elected officials, or really anyone with power, to utilize their power, whether it's a school administrator or provost, all the way to an elected official, right? They have access usually to information, others like them, funding, and sometimes actual policy decisions. At the end of the day, structural policy change is what we're about when it comes to building power for folks. So those are just some examples that folks can be thinking about. Let's see if there are any other quick questions. Let's see. So Yakira asks, it seems to me like the descriptions for allyship are based on a lack of characteristics of co-conspiratorship. Is this correct, or am I missing something? I don't know if I would say it like that. I think it's, to us, I think it's more of a process. It's a way that you are actually, if you think about like a line, you know, and you're evolving, each of us is evolving in terms of our solidarity practice, in terms of our social change roles, right? And to get to that sweet spot when you evolve, we are encouraging you to think about, what does it mean to answer these questions that we have up on the slide? And they're not necessarily, being an ally, as I said earlier, it's not necessarily a negative thing. It's about thinking about, how can you deepen? How can you expand? How can you get more effective? And some of the characteristics of being a co-conspirator pushes us a little bit, right? Some of this work is struggle. And it should be a space for us to think about, well, how can I do this a little bit better? Or let me check in with so-and-so to see what I got wrong and how can I do this better? So those are some of the quick responses there. I don't know, Anna, if there are any others that have come up. I'm trying to go through the chat really quickly. Okay, so I think we will move on and move on. So let's move on to the next slide. And Catherine, if there's another poll, you can pull that up. I think there's one more that we wanted to ask you all to get your thoughts, right? About what are the challenges you face in being a co-conspirator. So take a look at that and let us know what you think. Okay, let's see what folks are saying. Time to close the chat, Catherine. All right. Okay, so I don't know whom to ask for guidance or consent came up as one of the top responses. And that really is connected to, I think, either a question or a chat that I saw from someone as well. and Anna really covered this too, I thought, so well, because it is true that so much of it is knowing who it is that we want to ask for accountability as well as consent. And sometimes we don't have those relationships, right? We don't have those friendships yet or those connections. So part of what we're asking you to think about is how can you build that? Right? If there is a movement or a cause that you're interested in, that you care about, how do you build connections with folks? How do you reach across and build? And obviously, this is not done in a way that you are leaning on people, right? You're actually trying to build genuine connections. And I think someone else said they didn't want to take up space. Yeah, absolutely. It's not about being a it's sometimes one of the challenges of being a co-conspirator is you feel like you might take up space. And that is why getting consent, asking, how can I be of service? And really working with others, right? Solidarity is not intended to be something you do individually. It's a collective effort. And so are there folks on campus? Are there folks in your community? Are there folks here in this online community that we're creating that you can connect with so that you feel like you're doing something with folks rather than on your own? So yeah, please go ahead.
To add to that, Deepa, I feel like a lot of us tend to be very held back by this idea that we're going to do something and it is gonna, like I said, offend someone. It is not gonna be the right thing. Like you said, we don't yet have that accountability base. But this goes back to something that I think about as well. Adrienne Marie Brown quote about saying, we will not wait to be perfect because the time is now. And we will rather be held accountable for our mistakes than be, remembered for our inaction. And I may have butchered that quote, but I attributed it correctly. But the point is that, all of us start off in this work somewhere. And the more that you invest in those spaces that you're able to gather in, and these times, I hear y'all, it's hard. Most of these spaces are digital. Most of these spaces are happening via Zoom. They're happening via these Facebook Lives. But I will say, as a part of an organization that is constantly thinking of ways to foster community and break down isolation, particularly during COVID, there is just so much. You don't know what kind of friendships you're going to build by actually signing up to be a part of a training, or signing up to be a part of a listserv, signing up to be a part of an email chain. These are some ways to start now to be around folks that are thinking about things in the same way that you are. This is the base from which you start to build your accountability pod, the group of people that you can talk to and weigh in on, hey, I think, I want to do this. What do you think? And again, you're starting with organizations, with folks that have been doing this for quite a while, who are used to themselves making mistakes. So again, don't let yourself be held back by this idea of perfection. Don't let perfection be the enemy of good. Start somewhere.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. I dropped it in the chat, the name of Adrienne Marie Brown's book, Emergent Strategy, which Anna quoted from and did a really good job quoting from. But we know that we have given you a lot of information, right? The 6 C's of transformative solidarity practice are not characteristics that any of us have down, right? We're all works in progress. But what they help us do, and these 6 C's came from watching and being part of and building relationships with people over decades of work, right? And relationship building. And what they can do if we're able to kind of think through this, reflect on it, and as Anna said, try to act, right? At the risk of revealing that I listen to a particular Disney soundtrack with my son all the time, do the next right thing. That's all it is. And you'll know, because it's instinctive. You'll know it inside. When you are thinking about this, the next right thing will reveal itself. And so taking that step is so important. And so whichever C you work on, right? It's hard to work on all of them, but whichever C you work on, we really encourage you to do the next right thing. And what the next right thing for you could be just reflecting and thinking. All right, so I think we've just got a couple of slides left. In the next slide, we are talking about some calls to action. We're trying to give you calls to action. So I think every time we connect, we're trying to give you some calls to action. And this time we want to focus it on civic engagement. And so first, the census. Please complete the census. That is one step that each of us can take. Complete it for yourself, complete it for your family. It's unclear when it will stop being taken. So complete it as soon as possible. And also voting, right? Protecting the campus vote. If you are interested, again, in working with other folks on your campus, whether it is in person or whether it's remotely, and then encouraging family members and others and people that you care about to make a voting plan and vote, right? Using October Voter and letting folks know about that plan as well. So we really encourage you to get involved in terms of civic engagement as much as you can. So as we close, I wanted to lift up the next slide. Hope that you will join us on Thursday. It's been so great to do these Instagram lives, and I hope that folks will continue to join, but we've had a great lineup. And Thursday, which is not tomorrow, but Thursday, I'm in conversation with Judith Dianis, who is the executive director of the National Office of the Advancement Project. Judith is a powerhouse. For those of us who have sat in rooms with her or been on calls with her, she is a powerhouse. And she will, she's also Real Talk, like hashtag Real Talk all the way. So we will be having a lot of Real Talk. We hope that you will come and join us 6 o'clock on the Building Movement Project Instagram. Yay, someone said can't wait. Yay, that's great. And thank you, folks, a great session, learned a lot tonight. That's great. And Abigail is sharing something about the open mic that they host. Really great to see. Thank you. I love that. We're going to make some space, I think, next time for you all to share what you're already doing, because you're obviously doing a lot on your campuses and in your communities and online. And then we're going to close with this last slide, which is actually a quote from Bettina Love, whom I mentioned earlier, who's an abolitionist, a writer. And Bettina Love says in this quote, allies know all the language, they've read all the books, they come to the meeting with all the terms. But to be a co-conspirator is to take risks for somebody, to put something on the line. When you're using your privilege, use it. And I'm not just talking about white folks, I'm talking about cisgender folks. Use it for trans folks, use it for queer folk. Put something on the line and take a risk. So I wanted to leave you with that really uplifting, but also real talk call to action for us to be reflecting on and thinking about. We're so glad that you are in space with us every single week for the Solidarity Semester. I want to thank our amazing team, Deborah, Catherine, Marone, Anna, Shelby, for coming to this space every single week with the same momentum and energy that they had when we started it. We're really excited about all of the Power Up applications, so please get those in. And we look forward to seeing you online, hashtag Solidarity Semester, and then again this Thursday. Take care, everyone.